The most dangerous realization you can have is discovering that your life has been written by someone else, not in some conspiracy theory sense, but in the quiet recognition that every role you've played, every dream you've chased, every identity you've worn like a costume was handed to you by a world that never asked what your soul actually wanted to become. This isn't about rebellion or rejection of society. It's about something far more profound and necessary. You know the feeling. You're sitting in another meeting that could have been an email, nodding at conversations that feel scripted, playing parts in a story that was never meant for you. Everyone around you seems convinced this is real, this is meaningful, this is life. But something inside you whispers that this isn't your story at all. You're living someone else's myth, while your own remains unwritten, buried beneath layers of expectations and borrowed dreams. Joseph Campbell spent his life studying the stories that shaped civilizations, and he discovered something remarkable. Every culture, every era, every tradition tells the same fundamental story about the human journey from sleepwalking to awakening. He called it the hero's journey, but what he was really describing was the inevitable moment when a soul realizes it's been living too small and must venture into the unknown to discover who it truly is. The ordinary world, as Campbell described it, isn't evil or wrong. It's simply mechanical. It runs on autopilot, on agreements and assumptions that most people never question. You wake up, follow routines, pursue goals that society has declared meaningful, and measure success by metrics that someone else created. There's safety in this mechanical existence, comfort in knowing your role, security in following the prescribed path. But there's also a slow spiritual death happening, so gradual you might not notice until something shakes you awake. The shake can come in many forms: a crisis that strips away your illusions, a moment of profound loneliness despite being surrounded by people, a question that haunts your quiet moments. Is this all there is? Sometimes it arrives as a whisper, sometimes as a roar, but when it comes, you're faced with what Campbell called the call to adventure. Not a call to climb mountains or sail oceans, but a call to venture into the unmapped territory of your authentic self. Most people refuse this call. Campbell was honest about this. The refusal is natural, expected, even wise in some ways. The familiar world, however limiting, is known. The path inward toward authenticity, toward becoming who you really are beneath all the masks and roles, that path is uncertain. It promises no guarantees, offers no safety nets, provides no instruction manual. It asks you to leave behind not just what you do, but who you think you are. And here's where the danger begins. Not the danger of physical harm, but the danger of becoming a stranger in your own life. When you start questioning the stories everyone else accepts as truth, when you begin to see through the collective agreements that hold society together, you risk becoming an outsider to the very world you once called home. The mechanical life continues around you, but you're no longer fully part of the machine. Campbell understood that this awakening creates a profound loneliness. You see the beauty in what others call ordinary. You question what others accept without thought. You hunger for meaning that goes deeper than the surface satisfactions that keep most people content. You start to realize that the story you've been living, successful career, nice house, social approval, checking all the boxes, might be a perfectly fine story, but it's not your story. The hero's journey isn't about leaving the world behind or declaring yourself better than others. It's about the courage to discover what story your soul actually wants to live. It's about the willingness to feel lost for a while as you shed the identities that never truly fit. It's about facing the terrifying freedom of writing your own myth instead of following someone else's script. The call to adventure rarely arrives with trumpets and fanfare. More often, it whispers in the space between your thoughts, in the pause before you put on your daily mask. In the question that surfaces during those 3 a.m. moments when all pretense falls away. Campbell knew that the hero's journey begins not with action, but with recognition. The recognition that something is calling you toward a larger version of yourself. But this calling doesn't lead outward into the world of achievements and acquisitions. It leads inward, into the mysterious territory of who you are when no one is watching, when no role is required, when no performance is expected. This is the most frightening adventure of all, because the landscape is entirely unknown. You've spent so long being who others needed you to be that you've forgotten who you are when those needs disappear. The threshold you must cross isn't geographical, it's psychological. It's the moment you stop asking, "What should I do?" and start asking, "Who am I when I'm not trying to be anyone?" It's the decision to value your inner compass over external approval, to trust your authentic voice, even when it says things others don't want to hear. Campbell called this crossing the first threshold, and he was clear about what it costs. Everything familiar must be left behind. The loneliness that follows isn't a punishment, it's an initiation. Every hero in every story Campbell studied experienced this same essential solitude, not the loneliness of being rejected, but the loneliness of being seen. When you stop performing, stop pretending, stop playing the roles that kept you connected to the mechanical world, you discover who you are in the silence. And silence, as Campbell knew, is where the real transformation happens. This is why mentors appear in every hero's journey, not always as wise old wizards or mystical guides, but as anyone who has walked this path before, who can recognize the signs of awakening and offer guidance without trying to control the outcome. Sometimes the mentor is a book that finds you at exactly the right moment. Sometimes a stranger who says something that cracks your world open. Sometimes your own intuition finally speaking loud enough to be heard over the noise of others' expectations. The special world Campbell wrote about isn't a different place, it's a different way of seeing. When you're no longer hypnotized by the collective agreement about what matters, everything becomes more vivid, more meaningful, more alive. The mechanical world continues around you, but you're no longer mechanical. You respond instead of react, create instead of consume, live instead of simply exist. But this awakening comes with tests, as every hero discovers. Not the tests of strength or cunning, but the tests of authenticity. Can you remain true to yourself when everyone else thinks you've lost your way? Can you trust your inner knowing when it contradicts everything you've been taught? Can you be alone without being lonely, different without being bitter, awake without being superior? The greatest test is learning to live with the gift of clear sight. Campbell understood that heroes see what others cannot see, feel what others cannot feel, know what others are not ready to know. This isn't because they're special or chosen, but because they've done the inner work of removing the filters that keep most people sleeping. They see through the masks, beyond the games, beneath the surface drama, to the deeper currents that move life. And here's what Campbell knew that few dare to speak. The hero's journey isn't about saving the world. It's about becoming so authentic, so aligned with your deepest truth, that you become a living invitation for others to remember who they are. Your transformation becomes a lighthouse for other souls who are ready to stop living stories too small for who they really are. My friend, if these words stir something in your chest, if they name a loneliness you've carried or a calling you've been trying to ignore, then you're already on the threshold. You're not reading this by accident. Join our circle of fellow travelers, subscribe and share your own recognitions in the comments. This isn't about building an audience, it's about finding our tribe, those rare souls who understand that the real adventure happens in the inner world, where courage is measured not by what you dare to do, but by who you dare to become. The ordeal that Campbell identified in every hero's journey isn't a single dramatic moment. It's the ongoing challenge of living authentically in a world that rewards performance. It's waking up every day and choosing truth over comfort, depth over distraction, being over belonging. The dragon you must face isn't external. It's the part of you that would rather return to sleep than stay awake to who you really are. In the depths of this inner journey, you encounter what Campbell called the abyss, that place where all your borrowed identities dissolve and you're left facing the naked truth of yourself. It's terrifying because you discover how much of what you thought was you was actually just a collection of other people's opinions, society's expectations and survival strategies you learned so long ago you forgot they weren't originally yours. But in this seeming emptiness, this apparent loss of self, you discover something extraordinary. The you that exists independent of all roles, all achievements, all external validation. Campbell called this the treasure, the elixir, the boon that the hero brings back from the journey. It's not a thing but a knowing, the knowledge of who you are at your essence, beyond all the costumes and scripts. The shadow work begins in earnest now. All the parts of yourself you've disowned, all the truths you've been afraid to face, all the power you've given away, they all demand acknowledgement. Campbell understood that the hero's journey isn't about becoming perfect, it's about becoming whole. You must embrace not just your light, but your darkness, not just your strengths, but your vulnerabilities, not just what makes you acceptable, but what makes you real. This is where the path becomes loneliest and most sacred. Few people can witness this level of self-honesty without trying to fix you, advise you, or convince you to return to more familiar ground. The mechanical world doesn't know what to do with someone who's dismantling their false self to discover their true one. They'll call it selfish, impractical, a phase you'll grow out of. They don't understand that you're not falling apart, you're falling together. But then in the midst of this essential solitude, something magical happens. You meet others who are walking the same pathless path. Not many. Campbell knew the hero's journey is for the few, not the many, but enough. Suddenly you're not alone with your questions, your unconventional choices, your refusal to live a life that doesn't fit your soul. You find your tribe, those rare beings who understand that the real conversation happens beneath the surface, that the real connection occurs between authentic selves rather than performed personas. These encounters are profound because they're based on recognition rather than attraction, on truth rather than need, on who you are rather than what you can provide. Campbell called this meeting the goddess, but it's not about gender. It's about encountering the sacred through genuine human connection. Whether friendship or romance, these relationships become mirrors that reflect back your authentic self, confirming that who you're becoming is real and valuable and worth the journey. The temptation at this stage is to cling to these connections, to make them responsible for your happiness, to lose yourself in the joy of finally being seen. But Campbell was clear. Even the most beautiful relationships can become prisons if they keep you from continuing your own journey. The hero must learn to love without losing themselves, to connect without compromising their truth, to be intimate while remaining whole. This is the ultimate test. Can you be authentic in relationship? Can you love someone deeply while refusing to betray yourself to keep them? Can you offer your true self rather than the self you think they want? Can you receive their truth even when it challenges your comfort? These questions separate surface connections from soul connections, and the hero learns to accept nothing less than the real thing. If you've ever felt the ache of being misunderstood, if you've ever chosen truth over approval, if you've ever felt alone in a crowd of people living lives too small for their souls, then you know this territory intimately. You're not broken, you're becoming. Subscribe if this resonates and tell me in the comments, what was the moment you first heard your soul calling you to a larger story? I read every response because these conversations are where the real transformation happens, where we discover we're not walking this path alone. The return, as Campbell understood it, is perhaps the most challenging phase of the hero's journey. You've discovered who you are beneath all the masks. You've faced your shadows and claimed your light. You've learned to trust your inner knowing even when it contradicts popular opinion. But now comes the test of integration. How do you live this truth in a world that hasn't changed, among people who are still playing by the old rules? This is where many heroes fail. They try to drag others into their awakening, to convince the still sleeping that there's a better way to live. They become preachers instead of examples, teachers instead of embodiments. They forget that Campbell's monomyth isn't about converting others, but about becoming so authentic that you give others permission to remember who they are. The hero's gift isn't their knowledge, but their presence. The mastery lies in learning to live simultaneously in two worlds, the ordinary world that continues its mechanical rhythms, and the awakened world where every moment pulses with meaning. You still participate in society. You work, you love, you fulfill your responsibilities, but you do so from a different center. You're no longer driven by external validation or motivated by fear of rejection. You act from choice rather than compulsion, from love rather than need. This is what Campbell meant by becoming master of two worlds. You're not superior to those still sleeping. You simply see from a different vantage point. You understand that their mechanical existence serves a purpose in their journey, just as yours once did for you. You don't judge their choices because you remember when those same choices felt like the only possibilities. You hold space for their awakening without trying to force it. The loneliness transforms in this phase. What once felt like isolation now feels like solitude, rich, nourishing, essential. You're alone but not lonely, because you've discovered the difference between being by yourself and being with yourself. You've learned to enjoy your own company, to trust your own judgment, to find in your inner world a richness that no external relationship can provide or replace. Your relationships become more authentic, but fewer. You can no longer tolerate conversations that never venture beneath the surface. Connections based on shared complaints rather than shared wonder. Relationships where you must hide essential parts of yourself to maintain harmony. But the connections you do maintain are deeper, truer, more nourishing than anything you experienced before your awakening. The freedom Campbell described in the final stage isn't freedom from responsibility, but freedom from the tyranny of others' expectations. You're free to be generous without being depleted, strong without being hard, open without being naive. You've learned that setting boundaries isn't cruel but kind, that saying no to what doesn't serve you creates space for what does, that disappointing others is sometimes the price of not disappointing yourself. The hero's return isn't about fanfare or recognition. Most people won't notice that you've changed because the deepest transformations happen in consciousness, not circumstances. You might look the same, do similar work, live in the same place, but everything is different because you are different. You've stopped trying to fit your infinite soul into finite roles. You've remembered that you are not just living a story, you are creating one. Campbell spent his life studying the myths that shaped humanity because he understood that stories shape reality. The story you tell yourself about who you are determines the life you create. When you stop living someone else's story and start writing your own, you don't just transform your life, you transform life itself. Your authenticity becomes an invitation, your courage becomes permission, your journey becomes a path that others can follow toward their own awakening. The danger of living a story too small for your soul isn't that you'll fail, it's that you'll succeed at becoming someone you were never meant to be. The hero's journey Campbell mapped isn't optional for those who've heard the call. It's the only path that leads home to yourself, the only adventure worth taking, the only story that matters, the story of who you become when you finally have the courage to stop pretending to be anyone else. In the end, you discover what Campbell knew all along. You were never meant to live someone else's myth. You came here to create your own. And when you do, when you finally live a story worthy of your soul, you give everyone you encounter permission to remember they can do the same.